There comes a moment, often in silence, when a person looks around and realizes something unsettling. The books that once ignited wonder now feel heavy. Music plays, but it passes through like wind against glass. Even laughter, that ancient medicine of the soul, sounds distant, as if it belongs to someone else. You sit there, scrolling, sipping, existing, and somewhere deep within, a quiet truth whispers, "Nothing is fun anymore." Maybe it did not happen overnight. Maybe it was a slow erosion, like waves smoothing the edges of a once vivid shoreline. Days began to blur. Passions dimmed. The spark you once carried in your chest, where did it go? Did it burn out, or is it buried beneath the noise of life? You are not alone in this. In fact, this quiet despair is becoming so common it has taken on clinical names: anhedonia, burnout, low-grade depression. But beneath the labels, beneath the brain chemistry and lifestyle causes, there is something more ancient at play, something that has echoed through the centuries. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, saw this hollowness not as an error, but as a signal, a message from the soul. Jung believed that when the psyche is out of alignment, when life becomes a performance rather than a purpose, the self begins to rebel. Joy is not gone. It is hiding, waiting to be reclaimed through inner transformation. This emptiness you feel is not a failure. It may be the beginning of a deeper initiation, a call to step outside the mechanical repetition of modern life and begin the journey back to meaning. The feeling that nothing is fun anymore has always existed, though people have called it different names across the ages. In the medieval world, monks called it akidia, a spiritual dryness that left them slumped in their cells, unable to pray, unable to care. In ancient Greece, it was melancholia. In 19th century Europe, ennui. Every culture, in some form, has encountered this gray fog of the soul. Today, surrounded by dopamine-fueled distractions, the paradox is sharper. We have more stimulation than ever, and yet more people report feeling emotionally flat, disconnected, unmotivated. So, what happened? In this video, we will journey through history, psychology, and philosophy to explore why joy seems to fade, and how we can reclaim it, not by chasing fleeting pleasures, but by understanding what the soul truly longs for. Together, we will unpack what Jung saw in the human shadow, what modern science tells us about the brain, and how ancient wisdom still offers answers in a world drowning in novelty. This is not a how-to guide, it is a slow unfolding, a mirror, a gentle reminder that your longing is not a flaw, but a compass. What does it really mean when nothing feels fun anymore? At first glance, it may seem like a fleeting mood, a bad week, a symptom of stress. But when the emptiness lingers, when even the idea of doing something enjoyable feels like a chore, it becomes something deeper. Psychologists call this anhedonia, the loss of pleasure in activities once found enjoyable. But long before medical terms existed, humans had words and rituals for this experience. In the early Christian world, desert monks spoke of a condition called acedia. They described it as a thick sadness, a paralysis of the soul. One monk wrote that in the hottest hour of the day, a demon would arrive, not with fire, but with boredom. The monk would stare at the sun, wishing for the day to end, feeling no motivation to pray, work, or even leave his cell. It was a spiritual exhaustion, not just a lack of energy, but a lack of meaning. In ancient Greece, melancholia was seen as both a sickness and a temperament. Aristotle even observed that many great philosophers, artists, and poets seemed haunted by this heaviness. They could think deeply, feel intensely, and yet often slipped into shadows of despair. Melancholia was not just sadness, it was a kind of creative sorrow, a longing for something beyond the visible world, a yearning the Greeks often associated with the divine. Medieval physicians believed that melancholia came from an excess of black bile, one of the four humors. But even in their medical logic, there was a spiritual undertone. The melancholic was often a dreamer, a philosopher, someone caught between the realms of heaven and earth. Fast forward to 18th century France, and the word ennui enters the conversation. Ennui is not depression in the medical sense. It is a weary, spiritual fatigue. The soul becomes disenchanted with the world, bored not by lack of entertainment, but by the absence of depth. It was the disease of the upper class, the poets, the philosophers. But now, in the digital age, ennui has become democratized. It no longer belongs to salons and ivory towers. It sits with us on couches, beneath blue light, quietly gnawing at the edges of modern life. Even in the East, we find echoes of this feeling. In Zen Buddhism, there is a phrase, "Great doubt, great awakening." When life loses flavor, when the old joys fall silent, it may be a sign that the ego's framework is breaking. What you thought would fulfill you no longer does. This is frightening, but it can also be liberating. Carl Jung understood this very deeply. He wrote that when we no longer find joy in the things we used to love, the unconscious is trying to speak. The self, what Jung saw as the deeper, whole version of who we are, is sending signals. He did not believe such symptoms should be numbed. Instead, they should be listened to. In Jungian psychology, the loss of joy is often tied to the process of individuation. This is the journey of becoming fully oneself, not the persona we wear for the world, not the obedient ego we perform through, but the unique, often hidden truth at the center of our being. When joy vanishes, it may mean the life we are living no longer fits the person we are becoming. Think about that. What if the loss of fun is not a malfunction, but a message? A quiet rebellion from the psyche saying, "I am no longer willing to live half alive." In many traditional societies, such moments of inner collapse were seen as thresholds. In indigenous cultures across the Americas, the experience of emotional emptiness was often treated as a spiritual call, a need for ritual, for vision quest. The person would be guided by elders, not shamed. In some African traditions, dreams and disinterest in normal life were signs that a person might be called to become a healer or seer. The community did not pathologize the soul's fatigue. It honored it as sacred. So what changed? Modernity brought many gifts: science, progress, freedom. But it also brought fragmentation. In industrialized society, everything became a system. Time became a currency. Work became identity. And slowly, the space for a soulful reflection disappeared. What used to be a communal or spiritual crisis is now a personal failure. You are expected to bounce back, cheer up, try harder. If nothing is fun, you must be lazy, or spoiled, or broken. But what if none of that is true? What if the very structure of our lives is out of sync with what makes us human? We were not made to consume infinite streams of content. We were not made to compare ourselves to curated avatars on glowing screens. We were not made to live without seasons of rest, solitude, or introspection. In this context, the absence of fun is not surprising. It is a rational response to a world that has overfed the senses and starved the soul. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once warned, "If your daily life seems poor, do not blame it. Blame yourself for not being poet enough to call forth its riches." But even Rilke understood that sometimes the poetry disappears, not because we are ungrateful, but because something deep within us is shifting. You may be going through such a shift. The activities that once gave you joy may have served a former version of yourself. But as we evolve, so must our sources of meaning. To feel that nothing is fun anymore is not always depression. It is sometimes metamorphosis. In mythology, before the hero enters the unknown, there is always a moment of despair. The call is refused. The world seems gray. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. It is the liminal space between what was and what is yet to be born. This space is where many of us now live. numb, confused, disoriented, but also, if we are willing, ready. So when you ask, why does nothing feel fun anymore, you are not just asking a mental health question. You are asking an existential one, a spiritual one, a cultural one. You are asking whether the life you are living is real or merely efficient. You are asking whether your joy was ever truly yours, or just inherited, marketed, expected. And most of all, you are asking, who am I now? This is where the journey begins. With that question. With that ache. Because under the silence, something is still alive. Something is waiting to be remembered. And it begins, not by forcing joy, but by listening to the quiet, uncomfortable truth. You have outgrown the life you thought would make you happy. To say that nothing feels fun anymore is not always to say, I am sad. Often it is something more elusive. A quiet flatness, a thinning of color. It is a psychological fog where time passes, but meaning does not land. Where experiences come and go, but never reach the core. In clinical psychology, this state is often referred to as anhedonia, a diminished ability to experience pleasure. It is commonly seen in depression, but also appears in burnout, grief, trauma, and periods of major life transition. But even the most sophisticated neuroscience agrees on one simple truth. This symptom, this lack of joy, is not random. It is deeply tied to what the brain and body perceive as safe, fulfilling, and purposeful. When we stop finding pleasure in life, it is often because our nervous system no longer trusts the world, or ourselves, to provide meaning. This is not a defect. It is protection. The mind, overwhelmed or disillusioned, pulls back. It numbs. It waits. Carl Jung believed that such withdrawal was not merely a clinical problem. It was part of the archetypal process of transformation. In Jungian thought, the psyche is not just a machine or a set of behaviors. It is a living, symbolic world. Every symptom, including the absence of joy, is a message in metaphor. For Jung, when the ego, the conscious self, is too rigidly attached to a persona or a life pattern that no longer fits, the unconscious begins to press in. Dreams become strange. Emotions seem out of sync. Joy disappears. This is not failure. It is an invitation. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who we truly are beneath the surface masks. In this light, losing interest in things can be a psychic alarm bell. The soul, neglected or unheard, begins to pull away its light. The things that once felt good no longer work because they are no longer aligned with the self. Modern psychology has caught up with parts of this idea. Concepts like values dissonance, dopamine burnout, and existential fatigue echo what Jung intuited long ago. Values dissonance occurs when the life you are living is no longer connected to what you actually care about. You may be successful by society's standards, but if those successes were built on borrowed goals or external expectations, the joy will fade. Pleasure is not sustainable without meaning. The brain itself begins to downregulate interest in activities that lack emotional resonance. Then there is dopamine burnout. What happens when we overconsume novelty and stimulation? Social media, entertainment, even work achievements all spike the dopamine system. But if we chase highs without recovery, the baseline drops. Things that used to excite us become bland. We scroll more, watch more, buy more, and yet enjoy less. The system becomes numb. The soul grows quiet. Jung would say this is the result of a culture that prizes the persona, the social mask, above the inner world. When people live to be seen rather than to be real, the unconscious begins to rebel. The trickiest part. This rebellion does not come in fire or rage. It comes in stillness, in apathy, in the sense that nothing matters, that nothing is fun anymore. It is the shadow's way of saying, I will no longer participate in this lie. In mythology, this moment is mirrored by the archetype of the wasteland. In the Grail legends of medieval Europe, the land becomes barren because the king is wounded. Joy has vanished, not just from the hero's heart, but from the world itself. Crops die, rivers dry up, people despair. The only way to heal the wasteland is to ask the right question, not to conquer, but to understand, to listen. Psychologically, the wasteland is what we enter when the structures of our life no longer reflect the truth of our inner world. And, just like in the myth, healing begins not with a fix, but with a question. What do I really want? What part of me has been silenced? What am I pretending to enjoy? Who am I doing this for? These are not easy questions. They are uncomfortable. They strip away layers. But they also open the door to something vital: authenticity. Jung once said that modern man is in search of a soul. The external world has grown loud and fast, but the inner world has been neglected. Rituals have been replaced by routines, sacredness by schedules. We measure our lives in likes, productivity, outcomes, but we rarely ask if those outcomes serve the deeper self. To reconnect with joy, we must understand that joy is not just pleasure. It is resonance. It is when the outer world aligns with our inner truth. And that alignment cannot be forced. It must be rediscovered. Other traditions have known this for centuries. In Sufism, the loss of joy is seen as the soul's homesickness. Rumi wrote of a reed flute that sings because it remembers being torn from the reed bed. That longing, that ache, is the very proof of the soul's desire to return to wholeness. In Taoism, joy is not a pursuit, but a byproduct. When one lives in harmony with the Tao, the way of nature, of truth, joy arises spontaneously. It does not have to be chased. It flows from presence. Modern therapy echoes these ideas in a different language. Practices like acceptance and commitment therapy focus on values-based living. They teach us not to chase happiness directly, but to move toward meaning. When we live according to what matters to us, authenticity, connection, curiosity, joy often returns, quietly, naturally. Even neuroscience supports this. When people engage in activities that reflect their true values, brain scans show greater activation in areas associated with fulfillment, not just pleasure. There's a difference between a dopamine hit and a moment of peace that expands the heart. So if you feel that nothing is fun anymore, it may not be that you are broken. It may be that you are finally waking up to what no longer fits, that your soul is asking for something deeper than entertainment, that you are being invited to step out of the old roles and rediscover who you truly are beneath the noise. In the hero's journey, this is called the dark night of the soul. It is not depression in the clinical sense, though they can overlap. It is a passage, a descent into the unknown to reclaim what has been lost. Many people turn back here. They medicate, distract, perform. But those who stay, who listen, often find that something beautiful begins to stir in the silence. Not fun, but meaning. Not distraction, but direction. And slowly, from that place, joy begins to rise again, not as excitement, but as a deep exhale, as peace, as the quiet recognition that you are, perhaps for the first time, fully here. When nothing feels fun anymore, most people do not immediately fall apart. That is the quiet tragedy of it. Life keeps going. You wake up, go to work, smile when you are supposed to. You reply to messages. You eat your meals. You nod in meetings. From the outside, everything appears fine. But inside, something sacred is going missing. The absence of joy is not just the absence of happiness. It is the slow erosion of vitality. It is the sense that you are watching life through glass, that you are alive but not living. And over time, that quiet disconnection begins to bleed into everything. You stop calling friends back, not because you do not love them, but because the energy is gone. You stop trying new things, not because you do not care, but because you feel strangely hollow. You look at old photos or hear your own laughter from another time and feel an odd grief, like remembering a person you used to be. This is how emotional numbness spreads. Not in big dramatic scenes, but in the silent drift away from oneself. And without intervention, without naming it, without tending to it, that numbness calcifies. It becomes identity. You begin to believe that maybe this is just who you are now, someone who cannot feel much, someone who gets through the day but never really touches it. Carl Jung believed that psychic suffering often came not from illness, but from unlived life. He saw many patients who were not clinically broken, but spiritually starved. Their joy had not vanished randomly. It had been buried under duty, trauma, repression, or social masks that no longer fit. And the longer they lived in that state, the more their suffering transformed, from temporary confusion into chronic despair. Their sense of self began to fracture. When the psyche cannot express itself in healthy ways, it begins to express itself in symptoms: fatigue, apathy, anxiety, overconsumption, even physical illness. Modern psychology has backed this up with striking clarity. When people report a consistent lack of joy, their mental health outcomes worsen across the board. Depression and anxiety rise. Sleep disorders become more common. Relationships falter. Productivity declines. Even the immune system takes a hit. But perhaps more painfully, their sense of identity starts to collapse. Joy, after all, is not just a feeling, it is a feedback loop. When you laugh at something, or feel excitement, or light up in conversation, your brain records that moment. It says, "This is part of who I am." These moments of resonance become the breadcrumbs that tell you where your soul lives. So when joy disappears, so do the breadcrumbs. You feel unmoored. You forget what you used to love. You struggle to make choices because there is no compass anymore. Even simple things, what to eat, what music to play, what to wear, feel strangely difficult. That is not laziness. That is identity in crisis. This inner disorientation spills into relationships. When you no longer enjoy anything, others often take it personally. Friends may think you are withdrawing from them. Partners may wonder why you seem cold. Colleagues may assume you are burned out or disengaged. Few people have the language to say, "I am not avoiding you. I just feel nothing right now." This miscommunication isolates you further. Shame grows. You begin to feel guilty for your emptiness, which only deepens the sense that something is wrong with you. And the world, always hungry for quick fixes, offers little support. You're told to take a vacation, try yoga, download a gratitude app. But these solutions, while helpful in moderation, often treat the symptom, not the root. They offer a temporary boost to a nervous system that is crying out for something deeper. Historically, cultures have understood this state in more nuanced ways. In ancient Greece, melancholy was seen not just as illness, but as a philosophical temperament. The melancholic was the thinker, the poet, the one attuned to the sorrow and beauty of existence. In medieval Christianity, this loss of joy was called acedia, a spiritual dryness that afflicted monks in their pursuit of divine purpose. It was not laziness, but a kind of soul sickness, a loss of direction that left them staring at the wall for hours, unable to pray or work. In Buddhist tradition, this disinterest is seen as dukkha, the pervasive unsatisfactoriness of conditioned life. Even pleasurable things eventually fade, and attachment leads to suffering. The loss of joy is not always pathology. It can be insight, a signal that our current life is out of alignment with the deeper rhythm of existence. But in our modern culture, where success is measured in productivity, speed, and image, this kind of soul suffering is often pathologized, or worse, ignored. We do not have communal rituals for soul loss. We do not gather to reflect on what no longer lights us up. Instead, we hustle, we scroll, we pretend. And that pretending, day after day, starts to wear down the core of us. We begin to abandon ourselves, not out of malice but out of quiet survival. We do what is expected, even when it hurts. We perform joy instead of experiencing it. And eventually, we forget what the real thing even feels like. Jung warned against this kind of spiritual dissociation. He believed that when the soul is not heard, it will eventually force its way to the surface, often through crisis, a breakup, a breakdown. A moment when the carefully constructed mask cracks open and we are left face to face with our own emptiness. These moments are terrifying, but also sacred, because they offer us a chance to ask the question we have been avoiding. What have I neglected in myself? What parts of me have I silenced in order to be accepted, successful, or safe? The consequences of not asking these questions are immense, not just for individuals, but for society. A culture filled with people who feel no joy becomes numb, reactive, easily manipulated. Apathy is dangerous. It erodes not just personal fulfillment, but civic responsibility, compassion, vision. When people are disconnected from themselves, they are less likely to connect with others, less likely to take risks, less likely to care deeply about anything beyond survival. This is how burnout becomes cultural, how disillusionment spreads through generations, not with screams, but with silence. Yet within that silence, there is a hidden invitation, a quiet call to return. In many indigenous traditions, when someone reported a loss of joy or meaning, the village would not mock them or rush them toward productivity. Instead, the elders would ask 4 questions. When did you stop dancing? When did you stop singing? When did you stop being enchanted by story? When did you stop finding comfort in silence? These questions are not just poetic. They are diagnostic. They speak to the soul, not as a metaphor, but as a real thing in need of nourishment. A life that has gone dry needs more than strategy. It needs water, song, ritual, reflection, and permission to feel, to rest, to rediscover. So if you find yourself in this place, where joy is gone and nothing feels fun anymore, do not panic. Do not rush to fix it. Just begin to listen. Begin to ask. Because what may feel like the end of something could also be the beginning of your return. Your return to aliveness, to meaning, to self. Not all at once, but piece by piece, breath by breath. There is a strange silence in the space where joy used to live. Not quite sadness, not exactly despair, just emptiness. For many, this is the hardest emotion to name, because it hides beneath the surface, disguised as boredom, distraction, or weariness. But beneath those layers is something far more meaningful: transition. When Jung spoke of transformation, he did not describe it as a glorious epiphany or a lightning strike of insight. He described it as a process, slow, circular, and deeply uncomfortable. What he called individuation, the becoming of one's true self, is rarely linear. It unfolds in spirals. It requires disorientation. And so, if you feel like you're floating, disconnected from fun, joy, purpose, it may be because you're standing at a threshold, no longer who you were, not yet who you're becoming. This space, though painful, is sacred. The myth of constant joy. Modern society sells us an idea that is both seductive and cruel, that life should be a constant stream of fulfillment. If you're not having fun, you must be doing something wrong. If you're not excited, you're failing at life. But this idea is a lie, one that leaves countless people feeling broken for experiencing very normal human seasons. In older cultures, the rhythms of life were respected. There were seasons of planting and seasons of fallow, periods of celebration and periods of mourning. People expected change, and they built rituals to honor it. Now, we are expected to be productive and joyful every day. We are expected to have clarity, energy, passion, all while managing the quiet chaos of modern life: grief, uncertainty, overstimulation, loneliness. It is no wonder people feel numb. Jung warned that when a society loses its connection to the symbolic and the inner world, individuals suffer. They begin to experience symptoms: depression, anxiety, disconnection, not as pathologies, but as cries from the soul. Not everything that feels bad is a problem. Sometimes it's a signal. You are not supposed to know everything right now. There is immense pressure to have clarity, to know your purpose, to have a 5-year plan. But often, the most profound transformations begin when we finally admit that we don't know. This is not a weakness. It's the beginning of wisdom. In the in-between, the ego softens. The false identities we constructed to survive, people-pleaser, achiever, perfectionist, begin to loosen their grip, and something quieter, more authentic begins to speak. This voice does not yell. It whispers. It invites you to ask questions you were too busy to ask before. What do I truly want, beyond what I've been told to want? Who am I when I stop performing? What am I hungry for beneath the surface? These are not comfortable questions, but they are life-changing. The archetype of descent. In Jungian psychology, there is a recurring pattern: the descent into the underworld. Every hero, every seeker must face this descent. It is the necessary loss of control, the symbolic death, the journey into the unconscious. In myth, it looks like Inanna descending to the underworld, shedding her garments one by one until she is bare and powerless. In real life, it might look like waking up with no motivation, no clarity, and no joy. A slow disrobing of the ego. But descent is not destruction. It is preparation. In the underworld, we retrieve what we've abandoned: grief, creativity, rage, desire. We begin to gather the fragments of ourselves we left behind to fit into a world that demanded only our productivity. And when we emerge, if we are patient enough, we do so with something rare: integration. We begin to live not just from the mind, but from the soul. This moment is not the end. It is easy to believe that numbness is permanent, that if joy has left, it won't come back. But emotions, like seasons, shift. Even the grayest sky is a phase, and sometimes the absence of joy is not a punishment. It is a signal that the joy you were chasing was too small for who you are becoming. Maybe the version of fun you used to enjoy no longer fits because you have grown. Maybe the things that used to excite you were always slightly hollow, but you were too busy to notice. Maybe the boredom is not emptiness at all. Maybe it is space. Space for something real to enter. From numbness to nuance. When we talk about joy, we often picture something loud: laughter, excitement, celebration. But real joy, the kind that lasts, is rarely loud. It is more like a soft current underneath your day, a quiet yes in your chest, a moment of stillness where you feel at home in yourself. And to access that kind of joy, you may have to allow your current numbness to exist, to stop fighting it, to let it speak. What does your numbness want to tell you? That you've been hustling for love? That you've been pretending to be okay for too long? That you miss yourself? This is the sacred work: to feel the things you were never taught how to feel, to hold space for yourself in the silence. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. You begin to trust yourself again. You are still worthy, even here. One of the most damaging beliefs in modern life is that your worth is tied to your mood, your output, or your enthusiasm. But even on your numbest days, you are still worthy. Even if you feel like you are failing, you are still enough. Even when you have nothing to give, you still matter. Let that truth settle. Let it soften the part of you that believes you must earn your right to joy. You don't. You are allowed to feel disconnected. You are allowed to be in a season of stillness. You are allowed to not know who you are for a while, And still, you are allowed to hope. The slow return. When joy begins to return, it rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly. One day, you find yourself smiling at a stranger. Another day, you wake up, and your first thought isn't dread. Then, maybe, you laugh at a joke, or cry at a movie, or cook a meal and realize you enjoyed it. This is how it happens. Not in grand epiphanies, but in small moments of reconnection. And when it does return, it will not feel like the old version of fun. It will feel deeper, truer, more grounded in your real self, because now you are not chasing happiness. You are living in alignment, and that, no matter how quiet, is joy. The path back to joy does not begin with chasing happiness. It begins with listening to what has gone quiet inside you. When people say nothing feels fun anymore, they are not always asking for entertainment. Often, they are asking for connection with themselves, with something deeper. Because fun is not just stimulation. It is a form of aliveness, a sense that you are here, that something within you is being touched, stirred, remembered. But modern life has trained us to treat our emotions like software bugs, to be fixed, optimized, managed. When joy disappears, we go looking for productivity hacks, 10-step routines, or lifestyle overhauls. And while these tools can be helpful, they cannot substitute for what Jung called soul work, the quiet, inward process of reattuning to the parts of yourself that have been neglected. So, how do you begin that return? Slowly, honestly, with reverence. 1. Name the numbness. Without shame. The first step is to stop pretending that everything is fine. Sit with the discomfort. Let yourself feel the flatness without rushing to escape it. Try writing without judgment. What feels lifeless in my life right now? What used to bring me joy that no longer does? You might be surprised by what comes out when you stop editing yourself. This act alone, naming the truth, is powerful. In Jungian terms, it is the moment when the ego finally allows the unconscious to speak, and when it does, the healing process begins. 2. Reconnect with the body. Many people who feel joyless live entirely in their heads, thinking, worrying, analyzing. But joy often returns through the body, not the intellect. Try simple practices like walking slowly without a destination, just to observe stretching while breathing deeply, feeling textures, earth, water, sunlight, listening to music that moves you and letting your body respond. These are not productivity tools. They are reconnection tools. They remind your nervous system what aliveness feels like. In trauma-informed therapy, this is called bottom-up healing, using sensation to regulate and restore. 3. Engage in symbolic rituals. Jung believed that modern people suffer from a loss of ritual, practices that symbolically mark transitions, grief, longing, and growth. Without these, we float in emotional limbo. You do not need religion to create ritual. You just need intention. Light a candle every night and sit in silence for 5 minutes. Burn a note containing an old belief you are ready to release. Plant something. Bury something. Speak aloud to an older version of yourself and thank them. These symbolic acts speak the language of the unconscious. They say, "I am listening now." 4. Follow the threads of old joy. When you feel lost, do not start by asking, "What do I want to do with my life?" That question is too big when you are numb. Instead, ask, "What used to spark curiosity, even if it feels distant now?" Open an old book you loved as a child. Revisit a song, a color, a memory that still hums in the background. Joy often leaves breadcrumbs, tiny echoes of who you used to be. Follow them, even if the joy has not returned yet. The act of seeking is already medicine. 5. Embrace the small, not the spectacular. Modern culture sells joy as spectacle, adventure, luxury, excitement, but real joy is often found in the small, slow, and sacred. Try cooking a simple meal with care. Watch the rain. Sit with a friend without needing to entertain. Let yourself feel the ordinary again. As the Persian poet Hafiz wrote, "Now is the time to know that all you do is sacred. Joy is not in the fireworks. It is in the spark." 6. Interrogate your shoulds. One reason joy vanishes is because life becomes dictated by shoulds. I should work more. I should feel grateful. I should be productive. These internalized voices often come from childhood, culture, or trauma, but they are not your soul's voice. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to survive. Eventually, the soul tires of pretending. So try writing. Whose expectations am I carrying? Which parts of me have I been denying to be accepted or successful? Let the truth sting. Then let it free you. Evan, find or create spaces for honest connection. Loneliness amplifies numbness. And yet, when we feel flat inside, connection is the last thing we want. But it may be the very thing we need. This does not mean forced socializing. It means seeking or creating spaces where truth is welcome. A small group. A long talk with someone who listens well. A journaling circle. Even an online space that values depth. As Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Let yourself be transformed by honest contact. 8. Practice soulful stillness. Many people fear stillness because they assume it leads to despair, but often it leads to truth. Take time each day to simply sit, not scroll, not think. Just sit and notice what arises. Let your breath become your anchor. This is not about productivity. It is about presence. Stillness is where your soul leaves clues. As the mystics say, the silence will teach you everything you need to know. 9. Allow yourself to grieve. When nothing is fun anymore, something has likely died inside you. A dream, a version of yourself, a sense of possibility. That deserves grief. Cry if you need to. Speak it aloud. Write a letter to what you've lost. Grieving is not wallowing. It is making space for renewal. It says, I cared. I was alive once, and I still want to be. 10. Seek help, not just advice. If the numbness persists and begins to take over your life, do not go it alone. Therapy, especially with someone trained in depth psychology or trauma-informed care, can be life-changing. A good therapist does not fix you. They help you become curious about yourself again. They help you hold space for your contradictions, your shadows, your longing, and through that, your joy. Bringing back joy is not a project, it's a practice. One of the greatest lies modern culture tells us is that joy should be constant, that if you are not happy, something is wrong with you. But life is cyclical. There are seasons of harvest and seasons of stillness. Jung often spoke of this as individuation, the long, slow process of becoming whole. You do not need to rush joy back into your life. You need to make room for it to return on its own. You do not need to feel good every day. You need to feel you again, even if that includes sadness, confusion, and contradiction. Because to feel anything is to be alive. So if you are in the gray place right now, the place where nothing feels fun, do not panic. This is not your final destination. It may be the space between selves, the moment before the light returns, the chapter where you learn to sit in the dark and listen for your own voice again. And that voice, when it speaks, will say something incredibly simple. Welcome back. Maybe the reason nothing feels fun anymore is not because you are broken, but because your life has become too small for your soul, too quiet for your truth, too fast for your heart to catch up. You are not lazy. You are not ungrateful. You are not doomed to a life of apathy. What you are is likely tired of performing a version of yourself that no longer feels real, tired of trying to find meaning in things that no longer speak to you. Carl Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But when everything loses its flavor, its spark, its joy, that may be the soul's final invitation. The quiet knock on the door that says, "It is time to return." Because the feeling that nothing is fun anymore is not a sign of failure. It is a message, a sacred one. Something inside you is ready to grow beyond the life you have built. You may have outgrown your coping mechanisms, your narratives, even your dreams. What once felt right no longer fits, and now you find yourself in the in-between, no longer who you were, not yet who you are becoming. This space is uncomfortable, but it is also fertile. This is where real transformation begins. The alchemy of emptiness. In alchemy, there is a stage called nigredo, the blackening. It is the point at which all previous forms dissolve, a necessary descent into darkness, confusion, disorientation. But alchemists never feared this stage. They honored it, because they knew, before gold can emerge, lead must break apart. Jung saw this process as a metaphor for inner growth. When the old self dies, there is grief, yes, but also potential, not for becoming someone else, but for becoming yourself, more fully, more honestly, more awake. So if you are in the gray space, if you are waking up and feeling like joy has slipped through your fingers, pause before you rush to fix it. Ask instead, what is trying to change within me? What is being stripped away so something deeper can come forth? Looking back to move forward. Throughout history, people have wrestled with this feeling. The Sufi poets called it the longing that leads you home. The desert monks of early Christianity called it acedia, a spiritual dryness that required stillness, not distraction. In Buddhism, it was seen as a sign to deepen meditation, to observe rather than escape. And even in mythology, the gods and heroes descend before they rise. Inanna enters the underworld. Orpheus journeys for love. Psyche is abandoned and reborn. The pattern repeats itself. Descent, stillness, revelation, return. So perhaps what you are feeling is not an ending, but a threshold. This, too, is a part of the path. Modern life tells us that if something is not fun, it is not worth doing. That if you are not constantly fulfilled, something is wrong. But real life is richer and rougher than that. Joy is not a product. It is a byproduct. It is not something you chase. It is something that visits you when you are living in alignment with your truth. That might mean slowing down, letting go, unlearning, saying no to what drains you and yes to what revives you, even if it is quiet, odd, or slow. It might mean disappointing others, changing paths, asking for help. It will almost certainly mean becoming a beginner again, fumbling, curious, open. But that, too, is sacred, from surviving to living. The goal is not to get back to your old self. It is to become the version of you who can live from truth rather than fear, depth rather than surface, presence rather than performance. And from that place, fun returns. Slowly, gently, not like a party, but like a sunrise. You begin to laugh at small things again. You notice the light in people's eyes. You hum songs you forgot you loved. You pick up a book and it moves you. You go for a walk and you feel your own heartbeat, not as a background hum, but as proof that you are still here, still alive, still capable of joy, even if the world is heavy, even if the grief is real, even if the joy is quiet. It is yours. Let this be the moment you return. You do not need to be perfect to begin again. You do not need to have all the answers. You only need to begin listening to yourself. Your sadness is a signal. Your numbness is a whisper. Your fatigue is a map. And the way forward is not about fixing. It is about remembering. Remembering what made you feel alive once. Remembering who you were before you forgot. Remembering that joy is not something you earn. It is something you allow. So if you are in the place where nothing feels fun anymore, hold this truth close. You are not lost. You are just in between. You are not broken. You are breaking open. And the joy that feels far away is not gone. It is waiting. For you to stop running. For you to turn inward. For you to come home. And when you do, it will still be there. There is a quiet revolution happening. Not out there, but within. A shift away from the noise. From the pressure to always be happy, productive, fulfilled. A return to something older, deeper, more honest. And if you have felt disconnected from joy, from meaning, from yourself, you are not alone. You are not broken. You are awakening. This space, right here, is for that awakening. We do not believe in quick fixes or empty motivation. We believe in depth, in growth, in the power of remembering who you really are beneath the layers of expectation. Here, we explore what it means to live with purpose and integrity, to reclaim your emotional life, to understand the shadows and archetypes that shape you, to draw strength not from perfection, but from awareness. From Carl Jung to ancient myths, from modern psychology to soul-level healing, this channel is a space to breathe, to question, to reflect, not for followers, for fellow travelers. So, if something in this video stirred something in you, if you found comfort, insight, or even the language for something you've been feeling in silence, I invite you to subscribe. Not just to stay connected, but to stay committed to your growth, to your clarity, to your quiet power, because you deserve a space that honors your mind and your soul, that reminds you to feel, to think deeply, to ask the hard questions, and to live, not for the world's applause, but for your own peace. We are not here to escape reality. We are here to meet it with wisdom, courage, and open hearts. So let's keep walking this path together. Let's remember what we were never taught. Let's reclaim what was always ours. Joy, truth, and the quiet beauty of becoming fully, fiercely ourselves. Subscribe if you're ready. We'll be right here when you are.